All right. Thank you all for being here with us today. We're really excited to have this conversation. My name is Amber Smith, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. And we have a wealth of knowledge and questions and engaging conversation to dive into. And so once again, thank you for making time. We have a few people that, well, at least one person, Kory B, is with us from some remote location. So you won't be blessed to see her face live today, but we will see her smiling face on the picture. So please forgive her for not being able to have the video, but it's just because she can't actually access the video right now, but she does want to. So just, we want you to know that her heart is in the right place. So moving forward, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of give the lay of the land. So for everyone that is with us, if you're new to Zoom, I just want to make sure that you understand how this stuff works. Know that the Q&A is available, okay? The Q&A is available to you. The chat is disabled, all right? So when you have a question, feel free to just click that Q&A button down there at the bottom, and you can ask a question. And as we answer the question, you'll see it kind of probably go away. So just feel free to use that. You won't be able to utilize the chat for this webinar session today. This session is being recorded. And so for those of us, people have been asking, so are we gonna have access to this later? Yes, you will. So for all your friends who you really wanna make sure that they see this later, it will be recorded. So just to let you know that. The other thing is that you'll hear us go through different ideas and questions and stuff, you will have the opportunity to give us your feedback. At the end of this, you'll receive an evaluation immediately after this. So all those ideas that you're like, oh my gosh, I really wish that they had talked about this, or I would love to hear them say this or talk about this. Feel free to just write all that down and just send it back to us. So right after this is over, you'll receive an evaluation where you can give us commentary on how we've done, what you would like to see, because this is obviously something that we want to continue having, and we want to make sure that we're providing enriching content for you. The other thing that by the end of this, you will have the opportunity to know other ways you can engage, all right? So different types of conversations and experiences that we will be providing for you. Within this office, you will have the opportunity to further engage. So don't look at this as a one and done. We will still be providing opportunities. All right. So without any further ado, I would like to go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with some introductions. And let me see, I know who I'm going to pick on first. I know Dr. Harewood, I'm with Dr. Wilson. This green screen is calling me. So Dr. Harewood, could you please talk to us a little bit about why you're here, why this is an important conversation for you, and just give us a little bit of insight as to who you are.
So my name is Terrence Harewood. I'm an associate professor of multicultural education here at University of Indianapolis. This topic speaks to me in multiple regards, not only as a Black person, but as a person who feels called to really support people in really having a more meaningful and complex experience of differences. I am originally from the Caribbean, and ever since I got here, I've realized that there's been some very interesting perspectives on not only my cultural difference, but other cultural differences as well. And so my work is really about trying to help people to navigate and to have productive, curious, courageous conversations about difference, and to look past ideas of color blindness and to think about race not as something that's just bad, or difference is not as bad, but it's just different, to be able to engage and have fruitful conversations with others. That's a little bit about me and my perspective, and I will elaborate later on in the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Who would you like to pick on next for their introduction?
I guess we'll go right and head direct to Francine.
Okay. I don't want Francine right now. I'm gonna have to wait on her. Sorry. Why don't we go ahead and pick on Andre? Francine's introduction is too good. I want to save hers for later. Come on, Andre.
Mine is bad.
No, it's not bad. It's just that I can take yours right now. I have to work myself up for these introductions.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Once again, thank you, Amber, for inviting me to this panel. Greatly appreciate it. Everyone on the call, my name is Andre Gibbons. I currently serve as the Director of Undergraduate Engagement and Enterprise for the University of Indianapolis in the School of Business. This November will mark my 4th year at the university. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, a really small town called Chicago. I am from the inner city of Chicago, west suburbs of Chicago. So the reason why I'm here, because I'm very passionate about the work. I'm very passionate about who I am as an individual, and I would love to just have the opportunity to share my voice and just to express to everyone my no concerns, but what I do in my space, because I feel it's important to know that many times for me, I don't need a light shining over me to see the work that I do, but I am actively involved in the community. I serve as the vice president for the 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. The 100 Black Men is a local chapter, which is an umbrella of the 100 Black Men of America, which is our national, we're worldwide organizations. We have chapters in Turks and Caicos, Paris, London, recent chapter in Ghana. The work that I do, our motto is what they see is what they'll be. Our goal is to mentor kids, youth that's underprivileged from kindergarten through the collegiate level. I serve and help out and mentor and volunteer in all of those capacities. I'm currently the chairman for our financial literacy economic empowerment program, which we've been having the blessed opportunity to serve on the university's campus for the past 18 years. So, and once again, I'm very passionate about the work that I do. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Erica Swallow.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm excited to be here because it's my goal to get more white people involved in this conversation. Race has been a topic that's been very much pushed onto the Black community to find solutions, to give ideas, and even to solve the problem when it was really a problem created by white people. So I'm a small business owner, and I have seen and been a part of all types of bias in my career, and I'm very young. So I'm out in the community trying to educate other white people to help them see the issues, to see how they're a part of the issues, and then also take action to figure out what is it that I can do to actually be a part of this and actually do some good with my white privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. If we could make sure that if you can, on your screens, your volumes, we're having some questions about volume. So make sure our volumes are turned up so everyone can hear us. You can do this in your audio settings to the left of your screen. So just make sure those are turned up so people can hear what we are sharing today. All right. Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Kuykendall.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, President Manuel and Amber, for Dr. Smith for hosting this important forum today. I think it's just very timely. John Kuykendall, Dean of the School of Education, been here 2 years and really enjoyed my experiences. And I've been thinking a lot about what to say here. And I'm here because there's just a critical time in our society. Basically, it is time for racial justice reform to happen. I need to just be upfront with everyone that I'm very upset, very angry, and I'm very saddened by the recent events that have happened in our nation. As a Black man, we really just need to call it what it is, and it's racism. Growing up as a kid in the South, my parents really shielded me from a lot of racist acts. My parents were middle class. They had professional careers, and I benefited from those experiences in a lot of ways. My parents wanted me to have a far different life than what they experienced growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s with Black, brown, and indigenous peoples being devalued and not being afforded basic civil rights. And you can take this all the way back to the death of Emmett Till. For those of you who don't know about Emmett Till, he was a 14-year-old teenager in Mississippi who was brutally murdered for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Later on that night, some white folks got together and pulled him out of his uncle's home and murdered him beyond recognition out of the woods. Years later, that same white woman who he allegedly whistled at confessed that he never did that. He lost his life at 14 years old. You can also look at the recent murders of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, who's all seen that video. Botham Jean in Dallas, who was shot by a white police officer laying in his own apartment. Breonna Taylor in Louisville, who was shot sleeping in her own place of residence. And George Floyd in Minnesota, which has brought us to this point today. How many more Black folks have to die before we acknowledge what is real? So we're in a crisis of the hypervisibility of racism towards Black and brown people that leads to death. And so as a dean, it's important for me that I stand up for people who look like me and educate others who don't, so that we can begin the process of developing an anti-racist society. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for sharing that. Also being from the South, I remember having some pretty interesting experiences as an 8-year-old child. That's when I really learned that that's where I really began to understand a little bit more about what it means to be Black. And that was just because I was in an all-white private school and I was one of 4 Black girls, and I was picked on and, bullied and just different things. I didn't understand what was happening. And after having a birthday party where I was left alone and crying, my mother explained to me, and my father began to explain to me, these are the issues that you experience as a Black person in America. And so very early, you begin to try to make sense of a life that just doesn't really make sense, because you always associate, what did I do to be treated this way? And you didn't do anything. You were just born. And so I think that when we talk about all the things that are happening today, it does hit close to home for numerous reasons. And we are here today to put ourselves on the line and have some very vulnerable conversations. These conversations might not make you feel the most comfortable. They might not seem like something you would normally hear us say, but in order for us to actually move forward, we have to be vulnerable. We have to have real conversations, and we have to say things that don't feel good and don't necessarily sound good. And so we are here today to have those conversations. And so I do want to make sure that the audience is aware that that is what this platform is for, and that's how we will be engaging. And this is painful, and it hurts. And this is a conversation that we should not have to be having, but we are here. So let's have it. Kory, Vitangeli, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Amber. I apologize, as Amber said, unfortunately, I'm not able to have my video showing because I'm out of town, but I'm thankful that I'm able to be with everyone today, both personally and professionally, as someone who has been trying to fight for racial equity and against injustices, both in my personal life and professional life. It's important that we're having these conversations. I had an aunt who was very involved in the 70s in marching for racial inequities. And she really was formative in my views, both on my privilege as a Caucasian woman and how important it was to stand up for others who didn't have the same type of privileges that you did. And so that was very formative in my experience, and a lot of experiences I've had, both I can think of a significant one in junior high, again in college, where there was a lot of racial tension, where I was really trying to lead conversations amongst a group of students. And then a lot of those things led to me going into a career in student affairs. We're both, leading a division of people, working on hiring a diverse staff, and the importance of kind of training and just continuing to fight for inclusion and equity across campus. I've been involved as a leader of our Equity and Inclusion Committee across campus, was one of the people who put together the proposal for having our vice president position across campus, and just really has been important to me personally to recognize the privileges that I hold and how important it is to have a voice in these conversations.
Thank you, Kory. Thank you so much. I would like to turn it over to Dr. Torrey Wilson.
The reluctant participant.
I don't think you're reluctant at all.
Hi, I'm Torrey Wilson. I am the Dean of the College of Applied Behavioral Sciences. I guess with everyone else, I have to start with where I'm from. I'm a New Orleanian, born and raised. I will always be a New Orleanian, even though now I've lived away from New Orleans longer than I lived in New Orleans, but it is a part of my identity as much as my Blackness is. Its uniqueness, the things that define its culture, and oftentimes the brutal way in which you become aware of your Blackness in New Orleans defines who you are. I like to tell a story. There's some, if you look at the folks who started in Louisiana, from Huey Newton to Geronimo Pratt to Dick Gregory, we've had some oftentimes difficult but poignant figures come out of my home state. I lived in New York for a while, and then I made my way to Chicago to do my doctorate degree, where I spent 30 years raising my family until I came on board to University of Indianapolis just under a year ago. And it has been a very enriching experience. I am on this because Amber asked me to, and because there is a video that I'm sure has circled around that was forwarded to me of a little Black girl who's about 7 years old, who's speaking to an audience. They don't show who the audience is, but she's talking about, and she's struggling with saying it, but does an incredible job of talking about her struggle with what she is seeing. And it's heartbreaking because I have two daughters. They're young adults. And ultimately, we all come back to the notion that some of this work is predicated on what's personal, but is also built around who I am and the way I was raised. I sent out an email to my college where I referenced W.B. Du Bois' original article from 1897, when he talks about the duality of, at the time, we were Negroes. And that has always resonated with me in the struggle with that being Black, but being American, or being within the system, in but out, and the contradictions. And if we trace it back the way Dr. Kuykendall and others have talked about, I can remember it was the summer of Watergate of all times, when my difficult awakening around just perniciousness of race hit me. I mean, always having been aware of it, but the more salient elements of it that became very real for me. And it's at that point that I think the fire, to borrow, James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, became a part of my identity in terms of what is the role, what is my part in both understanding how I experience it, but more importantly, what can I do to change it? That's what drew me to, I think, in some ways, psychology, a curiosity about what makes us tick, what drives us to be and do and exist as we do. I've been teaching and consulting and doing work around diversity for some time now. And if I circle back, I had decided 2 years ago that I was no longer going to teach at the graduate level any diversity courses. And it was my decision was predicated on what I appreciate hearing from my white allies and collaborators, as I prefer, that too much of the work has been done by those of us who are disenfranchised. Theoretically, the on-the-ground work is done by marginalized communities, either Black, queer, Asian, Latino folks are the ones who have done the hard lift. And if this is to move forward, there has to be an inclusion, there has to be an investment, or as I said to those of you on the panel, skin in the game and addressing this issue. Otherwise, it is essentially us who are on the outside consistently asking for other folks to see, appreciate, and understand our pain.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Dr. Robert Manuel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Amber. Be happy to. Before I start my introduction, I want to say how pleased I am to look through the attendance list and see members of our Board of Trustees. I see faculty and staff. I see students. I see alums. I see friends of the university, and a little under 200 total attendees on with us. I think that speaks volumes about how deeply this is affecting us, and also how much of a community we are, and how well we can engage. And I want to really show my appreciation to Amber Smith for putting this together and being the leader at this moment that we need to make this occur. I've worked with a lot of wonderful people in my life, but I don't think any are finer or more dedicated or even passionate about living out our mission than the people here at the university. I've been at UIndy now for 8 years, and we've had many difficult situations present themselves to us over that time. And what I admire most about our people is that we've always addressed the difficult questions, put ourselves in community to do that. And I'm grateful for you all to continue that tradition today and being here today to continue those conversations. I come here today with really 3 distinct identities, 3 perspectives for this conversation. One is a university president, the leader of an institution. Second, as a white male. And third, as the 20-year husband to a Haitian woman with whom we have 3 beautiful brown children. I'm cognizant of the fact that I can move between realities in ways others can't. I can hide behind the title or move through life with the privilege afforded white males, but I cannot escape the reality that I'm responsible for guiding 3 lives through to adulthood in a world that sees them very differently than I do. I tell you this because my path to my own understanding of my role in our conversation today was formed through some very tough times and over the course of many, many years. Early on in my relationship with my wife, I couldn't understand why she reacted to certain people or events differently than I did. She was distrusting of many of the people that I saw as resources and aids to my development. Oftentimes when she was passed up for things like promotions or jobs, I assumed that the deficit was hers and that her reaction should simply be to work harder. Over time and with her patience, I finally began to see what the impact of systemic racism was on her life and how much more resilient than me she had been in order to succeed. Living in DC before I came here in a very affluent neighborhood is where I came to truly understand the differences between our worlds. We had our kids, they were very young, and we were at a playground, and I stepped away to take a call, and my wife was left by herself with the kids playing with them. As I came back, I noticed that there were 2 white women talking to my wife. And as I approached, the women left. And my wife looked out of sorts, and she told me that the woman approached her to compliment her on how well she was playing with those children, and then asked her what her monthly rate was for taking care of those children and whether she would be interested in being a nanny for their families. That was 9 years ago and almost 10 years into my marriage. It took me that long to understand the differences of the same stimulus on different backgrounds and different lives. I tell you this in hopes that we can create a bit of a pact with each other today. I'd like us to commit to each other for the long haul, to understand that what we're talking about doesn't end with a conversation that lasts 90 minutes. I'd like us to commit to each other today to move through the difficult, continue to engage the misunderstandings, and to not just understand, but to embrace the true power in difference. As president, I commit to you that I'll have these issues that you describe here today front and center as we chart our course for the future. And I'll ensure that the senior leaders with whom I work do the same. As a white male, I commit to you that I'll continue to work on discerning what positive and negative impacts I'm having on the lives of the Black and brown members of our community. As a husband and father of kids who are affected directly by this, I promise you, I won't forget the first two commitments I just made. I want to thank you again for being here today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Okay. It's Francine Carter.
Really? I have to follow that?
I mean, I'm going to have to follow you. So I feel like fine.
I'm here because I'm the loudmouth of the group. No. I'm here because I have to be here. I have to be here as a white woman of privilege. I have to be here because I am a professor in the Phyllis Landland Department of Social Work. I have to be here because of my past experiences. I'm also the daughter of a father who was in law enforcement his whole life. He started out in the Sheriff's Department, went to the U.S. Marshals Service, and then actually retired from Con Air in Oklahoma and was there during the Oklahoma City bombings and actually transported Timothy McVeigh, but I digress. I also grew up in a place between prejudice and acceptance, and I'm not even sure if that's the right word. So I will stick my foot in my mouth because I'm learning, and I want to learn more about how I may overtly or covertly say the wrong things that offend, but I'm not aware of yet. Growing up in high school, I felt the need to hide my interracial relationship. And I looked back, and as I was telling the panelists, you all earlier, I've since apologized to him for that belief that I had to hide something. I've also experienced having a Black family move into our neighborhood and having the N-word spray painted on the side of their house. And that side of the house faced my house directly. So when I walked out of my home, I saw that. And as a young person trying to figure out why, and having the race riots in my high school in the early 70s, there are so many experiences that I've had that I just can't put together, and why this is still happening is just beyond me. So I'm here as a white ally. I'm here as a professional. I'm here personally. And I'm here also to invite and to actually challenge those of us white folk on this call and hearing this later on to sit in this uncomfortable, perhaps, conversation, and where you are maybe feeling uncomfortable, to really look at and examine your truth. Listen to your mindsets. Listen to, as Dr. Harewood has said, the autopilot that you go on, or the of what you've been taught or you've learned. Be truthful to what you know you're saying in your head, your fears, your beliefs that go right into the racism column. Be transparent with it. Be willing to acknowledge it. Be willing to say, I need to learn more. Be willing to say, ooh, I offended you. Be willing to do all of this so that you can transform yourself and transform our country, our community, one another. So I'm here as that white ally to say, I invite you to look at your truth, be transparent with it, and find your transformation that starts today. So, yeah, see, the loudmouth.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francine.
Amber.
This is the University of Indianapolis, which means that we are here to serve students. As you know, the recent occurrences have impacted not only us, the people that you see that you're speaking with today, but also in a very serious way, the students that we serve on a daily basis. We've been able to talk to these students, and I was on with the group of students that I'm so fortunate to work with in the Office of Inclusion and Equity before we got on this call. And it's heart-wrenching to see the pain that they are currently experiencing. And it really feels, the fact is I don't have the answer. And so when you have to sit and have these discussions and you can't fix it by just a button, or as you all just noted, a 90-minute conversation, but you know that you do have a responsibility to try and begin to move things and try to figure out the strategies and the accountability. And you're working, and it doesn't seem like you can do your work fast enough to be able to actually to beat the clock, right? To beat the clock of all the things that are occurring. And so when we think about this in our role as an institution, and Rob, you have the responsibility, a heavy one as a president and as our leader in this situation and many situations. Our role here is to create an experience for students, but how, as a president, do you see the university's role right now in addressing these social issues that have been here, as we've all talked about, but they are flaring up again? And as much as we want to acknowledge the fact that these injustices have been occurring since, as Dr. Kuykendall and I spoke about, since we were children that we can remember, and even before that, the pain does not lessen at that thought. I mean, if anything, it increases. And so what can we do, Rob, from your perspective? What do you see as our role as a university and as practitioners with these students?
Well, I'll tell you, I grow kind of every year in my understanding of what this should be and how it should be. I go back to Abner Louima in New York City. You don't remember that he was sodomized by the police. He still lives in New York City. He still has a colostomy bag because of the abuse that he took. And I was 25 or 6 at the moment that happened in 1997. My reaction to that was very different than my reaction to this is at this moment. In part, I'm kind of angry that the cycle continues. I'm angry that we're not figuring out how to do it. And then I go to bed and I realize, well, the person who can change that is the president of at least an institution that affects a ton of people that are there. And so I step back now and I think the institution, we just went through this big pandemic and the response. We changed heaven and earth to make sure everybody was safe. We altered schedules and changed policies and cut budgets and made sure that we cared for everybody who needed to be here. And the approach we took to that was to simply go back to zero and said, how are our current policies affected and how is our work effective given the realities that the pandemic is giving to us? I think it might be time to do that now for some of these questions to see how the university engages and impacts and either consciously or unconsciously doesn't create the kind of environment that makes change in the world that we need. We sit back and tout the notion, or I do anyway, that the university is one of the last great organizations in our society that creates life chances for people. It's the last place where you could take your merit and put it forward and create just quality of life experiences that you couldn't have otherwise. And if we lose that ability, then we lose kind of the soul of the university. I think it's incumbent upon us now to look at in very holistic ways and deep ways and honest ways, look to release the myth and to look at what we need to do in order to be better for the populations that we serve and ultimately hope to help. You said I have a tough job, and I would agree it's difficult, but would not agree that it's as difficult as my fellow panelists who live a different reality than I do inside of that organization. So the other part of my job that's changing is to try to stop solving everything. My job has always been, I've always seen my job as see a problem, fix a problem. And when I can't find the answer to it, I tend to get frustrated. What I'm realizing now is I can see a problem and then find the right people to help me address that problem. And that becomes systemic change that I think could have a chance at breaking apart the kind of injustices that we see.
Systemic change is requires cultural shifts that can be very difficult to achieve, and that could be some of the reasons why I'm saying the society as a whole maybe has not taken the attempts, as you just noted with what we've done with coronavirus, right? And so as a result, I think that there's these aspects of the Black experience that requires them to live in coexisting realities. Torrey, you talk a little bit about duality, and I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more insight as to this duality and how this duality is reflected in these times.
Well, I think part of what I'd start with is, while folks are aware of and have heard Du Bois' terms, and it comes out of both his book, The Soul of Black Folks, but also the 1897 article that predated that was in the Atlantic Monthly, which was founded as an abolitionist newspaper. And he was one of the co-founders, as I recall. But, you know, as I read that again and reflected on it, we're talking 1897. Not a lot has changed. The trappings have changed. We've seen movement, but with regard to how, as a country and as a society, we oftentimes marginalize or place Black folks, there's still kernels of reality with that still in play now. So, I mean, just to read a brief piece of it where, you know, and I'll admit that I'm biased because it's some of my favorite parts. So I'll just qualify that up front. Where he talks about, if I can find that, the classic question being, how does it feel to be a problem, they say. I know an excellent colored man in town, or I fought in Mechanicsville, or do not these Southern outrages make your blood boil? At these I smile, or am interested or reduce the bone to a simmer as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. And yet being a problem is a strange experience, peculiar even for one who has never been anything else, save perhaps in boyhood and in Europe, speaking of his experience in Europe. It is in the early days of rollicking boyhood that the revelation first burst upon me, one and all in a day, as it were. I remember well when the shadow swept across me. I was a little thing away in the hills of New England, where the dark Houstonic winds between, well, he goes into some details, but he basically starts to talk about what it's like. That the other line is how we fight to keep from being torn asunder, and what it means to constantly deal within the aspirational truths of the U.S. and the harsh reality of where we're placed and the experiences we have. And as I prepared for this, you know, part of the difficulty I think with, at least I will speak for me, in engaging in these types of dialogues is it requires that we re-experience the difficulties that we have personally endured. So, you know, you go from the sublime to the ridiculous, and then you're left having to defend those experiences as having been rooted in race, when those of us who live it know it's racial. Something as simple as, if I'm stopped by a police officer, what's the first question for those of you who are non-brown people typically are asked by the police officer?
License and registration. Maybe.
Or do you know why I stopped you?
Oh.
One of those two. Your license and registration is accurate. The questions that I get is, and I can distinctly remember one incident in particular, driving back to New Orleans over an extended period with my young daughter, who was probably 3, sitting in a high chair in the back, and my wife. And I'm stopped. I was speeding. I admitted I have a lead foot. I'm cool with that. So stop me and, tell me, how fast you were going. The first question from his mouth is, whose car is this? At which point my wife touches my arm because she knows I'm about to lose it. Now, this is in Mississippi, outside of Jackson. The second question is, where are you going? At the time, I was 38, 37. And of course, what I want to say is none of your business. Give me my ticket so I can go about my business. But there's risk with doing that. So being in the position where I want to assert my perceived privilege that is taken away from me in that moment, there's risk. Weeks before the shooting in Georgia, we get a break in good weather. I got to decide whether or not it's safe for me to jog through my neighborhood because I need to get a run in. I didn't. And then once that happened, I don't. So those are some of the realities. While I am in many ways symbolic of Black success, I still live with restrictions on how I can live my life. And to speak to what John mentioned earlier, the pain, the rage is real, because you're never too far away from that possibly being your experience. And if you take that and place that in the position of those who have far less power, and understand why you have these bursting fits of anger when something like this happens, it makes it more real. I'll close with the reason why I decided no longer to teach, besides the fact that it wasn't just minority folks. The other question is, how many of you, and many of you have teach or are currently teaching, have been asked in a classroom or told, you're incredibly articulate. Did you learn to speak so well in graduate school? And the last one that really closed it for me was, you're so intelligent. I'm so impressed. This is from a student who feels completely comfortable saying this in a classroom without any sense of, do you understand what is implied by that statement?
I mean, that's not just the classroom, right? I mean, I get that. I get that all the time. You are so articulate. Wow, you are so intelligent. And I have to think in my mind in comparison, who are you comparing me to? Why is that shocking? What are you saying? I think that, yeah. So John, as a leader and educator, and when you think about some of the things that was just described by Torrey, and we're talking about these kinds of experiences, what would you encourage whites to do when we talk about helping with the racial injustices? What are your thoughts around how we do that in education? Unmute yourself.
My apologies. So that's the question of the hour. So this may be met with some disagreement, but I'll say it anyway. If you're white and you're male, you're heterosexual, you're Christian, you don't have any obvious disabilities, you have a meal ticket for success in America, or shall I say a real head start, right? Those characteristics are embraced in our society. If you don't fall into any of those categories, then in some ways you're going to be marginalized or oppressed. I check off on many of those boxes, but I don't check off on one. I'm a Black man, and that's the obvious one, right? And that's the one that brings about race, and that's simply prejudging someone or having biases based on their skin color, simply put, right? And we've heard many examples of it, and we've witnessed it in our society that people are judged simply because they have a different skin color. So even with my accomplishments, there's still a privileged group that continues to oppress, whether they know it or not. The first thing that people of privilege have to do is acknowledge that they have the privilege. I was pleased to hear Kory V, Francine, and President Manuel say that. That means a lot. Erica, it means a lot because you have to acknowledge that you have that privilege in this world, and it gives you distinct advantages. I think that people of privilege should also start to have a far better understanding of other races and cultures. I'd like to give just a mini shout out to my SOE colleague, Dr. Terrence Harewood. I spent the past 3 days with him in the afternoon going through a very powerful cultural experience. And it's really changed me for the better. And I want to thank him for that, he and his team for working with a group of folks all over the country and helping us better understand who we are and how we can respect other cultures. So thank you, Terrence, for that. You're doing a phenomenal job. For people of privilege who still don't get Black folks, want a better understanding, a simple thing to do for those who travel and like to travel, I suggest going to visit the African American Museum of History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Spend a couple of days. That's what you need to do there to really get a picture of the plight of Black Americans. For over 400 years, you can take this wonderful journey of the Black experience and how we arrived here as slaves. Although slavery no longer exists, there are many other forms that keep us at a distinct disadvantage: control, power, privilege. White people of privilege should start to develop what I like to say is an anti-racist mindset, which means that you have to pay particular attention to the laws and the injustices and the policies and the practices and the customs that disenfranchise dominant groups. So, for example, when you benefit from the many opportunities that promote and advance your own background, that's a problem, okay? I think it's critical that we move our conversations from just simply talking about diversity and inclusion to more about equality and justice. We use the term diverse to kind of acknowledge the realities of what we would like to see, but we don't talk much about equality and justice. See, they're different in some ways because you want to be included and you want diversity. However, you don't want the same things, nor do you want people to treat you the same way if you have similar circumstances. So you may be for, better stated, you may be for diversity and you may be for inclusion, but the tune changes when people start getting the same things. The tune changes when two people are in the same situation and get a different outcome. So the justice piece is different. So we need to start shifting the conversation to equality and justice too. We see countless examples of why justice does not work well in America. And thus, when you turn on the nightly news, you see the consequences of that, right or wrong. I don't agree with everything that's happening right now at night in these metropolitan areas, places all over the world. But it is an outcome of a lack of justice. When you think about the murders that have taken place. And lastly, I'll end with this. I think the protections, the powers, and the privileges that white people have, it's absolutely critical that they acknowledge it and begin to have conversations among themselves in their circles. As a white person, you need to ask yourself important questions. Do you judge people based on their race? Do you allow your white friends and your circles to make racist comments and you sit there and not push back? For the faculty members that are on this call, do you treat all of your students the same regardless of their race? Do you inherently have higher expectations for white students, not Black students? So I think that those are some meaningful, thoughtful questions that need to be addressed and thought about in circles so that we can really begin. We talk about change, we talk about moving this forward, we talk about solving these problems, but it really is something that needs to be tackled within the white privileged circles and start to really have meaningful conversations around what am I doing? How am I really treating people from different backgrounds? So again, just to summarize it, acknowledge that it exists, seek to understand, and denounce prejudices in your circles and begin to advocate for oppressed groups.
And if I could push that further, I would also say knowing that language matters, because in that quest for understanding, we talked a bit earlier about being saying you're so articulate, you're so smart, or another one that's we see around is instead of Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. But examining what that means and what is the underlying message there. A really interesting analogy that I've seen is it's like, if all lives matter, would you say if there's a burning house on your block that all houses matter, so that you should, when the fire department comes out, should they spray all the houses down? No, there's one house that's really on fire and needs the attention here. So it'd be that house that matter. Or if one kid in your class gets a cut, are you going to hand a Band-Aid out to every single kid because all the kids matter? No, in that case, you're going to give the Band-Aid to the kid who has a cut. And in this case, we need to know that language matters. And when we say all lives matter, that is not, what we're saying is that Black lives don't matter. Because if the Black community is on fire right now, I'm not standing up for that. I'm just gonna continue to dole the same treatment across all lines. And so that would be one thing. And to your question, John, on do I treat people differently? A lot of research shows that in America, the question isn't do I, it's how I. And I would encourage everyone, we'll be sending out resources afterwards. And one of those resources is a race implicit association test you can take to see to what degree do you have a hidden bias, to what degree do you favor in America, no matter your race, in America, most people favor white above Black because there's this ingrained racism across racial lines.
I appreciate a lot of what I'm hearing so far. It is a very complex issue. And I think that's exactly why we should be having this conversation, because we come to these dialogues with mindsets, right? And our mindsets govern essentially the way how we think about and the way how we experience these topics. If I haven't had a lot of exposure or experience really thinking critically about these topics, then the degree of complexity that I can bring to these complex topics it might not necessarily match what's required in this situation. And I've been privileged in my 18 years at the University of Indianapolis, as well as doing a lot of diversity and inclusion work, to hear a variety of mindsets. One I want to begin with, a student in class one day said, I think that may be part of the issue, that we're spending so much time talking about race. And then she used this metaphor. She said, it's like if we have a sewer, if we keep picking at this sewer and picking at this sewer, then it can never heal. So perhaps the solution is to stop talking about it, stop picking at it, and we can end racism in this country. Because I bring a developmental perspective, I understood that what she was saying simply reflected where she was developmentally, and it simply reflected the level of complexity that she could bring to this topic. So I use her metaphor, and I encourage her to think about another way to think about that sewer. So imagine then that, yes, race is like a sewer, racism is like a sewer. And for so long, we have been leaving this sewer, and we've never really addressed this sewer, right? So essentially, because we don't want to address it, we just keep putting Band-Aids on it. So what was happening underneath is started to get gangrene. So we have a couple of options, right? We can kind of do the hard work and kind of dig and scrape out all of that pus, or we can just leave it alone. Don't pick at it. Don't do the hard work and basically lose the arm or lose the leg. And I think that is pretty much like what's been happening here in our country. Many people are so uncomfortable talking about race, talking about differences. And so we operate from a colorblind perspective. We want to see everyone as being the same. We want to just talk to everyone being the same. We want to treat everyone as being the same. And there's some beauty in that, right? The golden rule. But because I'm coming from a different perspective, because we know that people are experienced differently based on their identity markers, then the reality is that treating people differently and engaging difference is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's our perspectives that we have about these differences and the behavior that accompany those that really make it bad. So we have to be able to have a different relationship with our perspectives. And I like the work of adult development. Robert Keegan talks about the idea of a subject-object shift. And that is the idea that whenever we are subject to something, that thing that we're subject to, because we're so immersed with it, it governs, it regulates, it dictates, it impacts the way how we perceive and the way how we experience our experiences. And for many of us, that thing that we're subject to is our bias, is our prejudice, is our privilege. It could be our race, it could be our identity markers, it could be our political perspective. And that thing governs us, right? It regulates us. So he suggests that the way how we move past that and that we actually grow and develop is we move these things from subject to object. We have to be able to take a perspective on them. We have to be able to to untangle ourselves from them so that we can actually change and grow. And I think that, for many of us, privilege is one of those really challenging things. And a lot of white America right now are uncomfortable with this because essentially they see acknowledging privilege as the possibility of other groups, becoming more empowered, and they're losing their sense of power in this country. And that's hard for them to really wrap their heads around. So they tend to become very defensive, tend to deflect these conversations. But I have been encouraged by the high level of participation by whites in this movement. But I also want to say that even though I'm encouraged, to me, the proof is in the pudding, right? I know that when people have a highly emotionally charged situation, there's a lot of stuff that happens, but we also know that the lifespan of these news events is pretty short. And so I want to see what happens afterwards. When we think about white racial identity development, we know that this will be classified as the disintegration stage. And what happens here oftentimes is that many whites may actually find themselves becoming judgmental towards members of their own group. That's reverse polarization. So it is a form of polarization. So when we sit with that, and when the smoke goes out in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, they then have to go back and face members of their own community. So what happens quite often is that they end up reintegrating, because sitting with that moral dilemma, how do I deal with members of my own community? How do I address this? Do I see these people as part of the blame for it? And so that moral dilemma oftentimes send them right back into reintegration. So I want to strongly encourage them to kind of sit with that and to recognize that is a very likely outcome that can happen as a result of that. The other thing I want to say is that for a lot of whites, they really misunderstand comfort. They mistake comfort for safety. So when I'm uncomfortable, I feel like, oh my God, I'm not safe. This stuff is making me feel not safe simply because I'm uncomfortable. But I want to leave you with this question. If you're part of an organization, or if you've been living your life and you've never really had to feel uncomfortable, who had to feel uncomfortable in order for you to keep feeling comfortable? Who had to sacrifice their own comfort so that you had to feel comfortable, right? Somebody has to be uncomfortable, right? And for too long, the people who have had the least amount of power has been the ones who had to do the most adaptation and who had to be the most comfortable. So let's share in this, let's sit with this discomfort, deal with this liminality, sit with the ambiguity, because that's the only way we can really see any real positive transformation coming out of this.
Well, can we talk a little bit about that? When we talk about white allyship and what can be done and what's happening, I think it's important that we create some tangibles or discuss some tangibles around that. So I think that this is a good opportunity to kind of turn the floor towards what are some of the things, Erica, that you have been a part of that maybe create a more tangible opportunity for people to engage. And then I would like to move towards the resources that the institution provides and some community resources that Andre is involved with. Go ahead. Erica, unmute yourself.
Yes.
There you go.
So we've talked about recognizing your privilege. We've talked about developing an anti-racist mindset. And we've talked about actually doing something already too. So we've covered a lot of ground here. So this is good. Actually looking at what are the issues in your community, what actual policies are creating the oppression here. In a lot of the cases, not a lot, but what's going on right now is a lot of police brutality, and there's a lot of racism from citizens on other citizens. But some of the stuff that that I get most passionate about is when our actual systems, our public service, actually is infringing on the rights of Americans. So I have developed myself I was just reflecting on this. I grew up in the South, and I actually, this week, I only remembered that I had at one point in my life been, I guess, a majority minority. I lived in Blytheville, Arkansas for a year, and I was one of the, what I perceived as, I was like in kindergarten or first grade, but I went to a mostly Black school. And I remember that was the only school where we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day in my entire K-12 experience. So I'm thinking, my development as someone in this conversation has been from someone who had, growing up in a mostly white community, I could count the number of minority families on one hand, to having that very, rare experience of, for a year of my life, being being in a more minority situation and seeing not the difference of how I was treated, just the difference of what a school that was built for just Black students would look like, and what are the things we talk about. And the education I received through my experience as a white person in America, and that most kids, regardless of race, receive in America, is a narrative around Black weakness. And the only narrative we hear is around slavery and white saviorship, where lucky us, we had the civil rights movement, and now all that's gone. And it took me going from the South to being a first generation college student in the East Coast and going to school in New York and Boston, and finally seeing a little bit of what a world I would like to live in, from going from a all-white community to being in a very, the real melting pot that we think of as America. And New York City is sort of what I hold as the closest to the kind of, the closest and the furthest away, actually, from what I would like to see. It's a city that has some of the most beautiful melting pot of America, but also some of the worst segregation and inequality, inequity in education, and also treatment of communities. So I had to develop myself and understand what was out there. Went from not really understanding my white privilege to trying to figure that out. That's an experience in its own right. And slowly making tons of mistakes, by the way. So that's one thing for the anyone who's white on this call, you might be in that experience now of making mistakes, saying the wrong words, actually being totally racist yourself while trying to have good intentions. I can remember there's so many moments where I just wanted to smack myself in the face because I'm like, I don't even know if I can do this. To finally, within the past, 5 or 6 years, actually going to each time someone is murdered on the streets by police officers, if it's in my vicinity, going to Ferguson, going to Baton Rouge, if it's not in my vicinity, marching in my city, and I've moved all over the place. And so I've found that over these, just as the Black community feels so much anger and just sometimes despair and hopelessness that this is ever going to change, I also feel that because I'm an American and I see this happening, and we're supposed to be a city, we're supposed to be a country where everyone has equality, everyone has freedom, and that's definitely not the case. So as American, I get really upset about this too. So these days, I'm taking a more active role, even beyond protesting, even beyond signing petitions. Like, these are all things that we should and can do to try to help this situation. But most recently, I started an initiative called Police the Police Pledge. It is an initiative where we as white people can use our white privilege to hopefully end police brutality, or at least dismantle it a little bit, by actually stopping when we see Black encounters with law enforcement, and just standing there in solidarity and filming if need be. One of the only reasons we are seeing justice, or starting to see pieces of justice, we need more convictions, but the reason why is because we are seeing this happen on film. So if we can, one of the things is it's even dangerous to film because our police don't even abide by that simple right to film in a lot of cases. So as a white person who can almost safely stand, and even definitely more safely than a person of color, in front of the cops and film them and demand the right to be able to film, that is something that I'm encouraging the white community to do, beyond signing petitions, beyond getting involved in the policies. All of these are things you can do. It's all about basically making a commitment, and a commitment to end the silence and to actually do something.
Can I say something else in terms of actionable? I think as I was talking about this whole subject-object shift, a very, very practical thing that folks can do is to perhaps use this subject-object shift by stop thinking about I am to I have, right? Because when I am something, again, I'm subject to it, right? I'm entangled with it. So it's kind of hard for me to take a perspective on it. So on the other hand, if I move that from I am to now it's a much more objective space, I can kind of look at it as something that I currently have, something that I can kind of navigate, something I can do about. So a lot of people, for example, get really caught up with the idea of, being called a racist. So if I think about myself as I am a racist, I'm going to struggle, right? Because I'm going to think, oh my God, I'm such a bad person, or I'm going to kind of resist it. But what if it might be possible that growing up in a racialized society, I have internalized racist perspectives, and because I'm so subject to them, I don't necessarily know. I wonder what that might evoke for people if they're willing to say, what's possible? Is it possible that I have these internalized biases, these internalized privileges, these internalized racist perspectives that may be perpetuating some things that are problematic? So I encourage you to kind of get beside yourself, put yourself at risk for growth and development, like asking critical questions, right? What perspectives might I have here that could be perpetuating some of these ideologies? The other thing for educators on the line, one of the things that I found myself doing, and I'm still engaged in the process, is I did an equity analysis on my own courses, because I'm interested in finding out, do I actually have these biases that may be impacting the way how I grade my students? So I contacted Mary Moore, and I've got grades for my students for the last 5 years. And I'm doing an equity analysis. I'm trying to see, do students from different racial, ethnic, genders, first generation students, am I giving certain groups more A's, or are there disproportionately groups that are getting more A's or B's or C's or D's or whatever, right? just to see, maybe there's something that I'm doing that could be perpetuating that. So I encourage you, this is a very easy thing to do. Do an equity analysis. One of the things I'm also interested in is an interaction analysis, because we know what the research says, that sometimes, especially from the dominant cultural perspective, we don't tend to interact with people who are culturally different from ourselves because we're uncomfortable. So if I were to look at my interactions, either electronic or in-person interactions, what might that tell me about how equitable I am in terms of my approaches to people who are different from myself?
Thank you. Yeah, and we have numerous questions that are coming through the chat. So I just want to let everyone in the chat know that we will have numerous opportunities, several opportunities that we'll be announcing at the end to address some of these more specific areas, as well as we'll be sending out resources following this conversation. I do want to hear and provide, at least verbally, some of the resources that are here for our students. Andre and Kory Kory works obviously over student affairs. Andre, you're doing some work within the community. Could you share a little bit with us about the community resources that you have, and then follow that with some things that Kory may want to share as it relates to being able to support our students at this time?
Yes, yes. So quite a bit of the work that I do personally is with the 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. Just as a disclaimer, no, it's not limited to just 100 Black men. I know that's one question that's usually asked. The work that we do in the community, and I'm so thankful for everyone on this call and your perspective. But just to give you some context to from where I sit, I think everyone brings a unique perspective. Being a product of the inner city of Chicago, racism, to be honest with you, wasn't on my radar, right? And the reason why, because I grew up in an environment where I have to pretty much step over a dead body to get to school. I grew up in an environment where I have to step on syringes to get to school when I walk. I grew up in an environment where a lot of unfortunate things took place in my area that really wasn't very fortunate, I should say. And I could go deep with this context, but I choose not to. And I had to come to grips with myself that I do suffer slightly from PTSD based off my lifestyle growing up here in the city of Chicago. Statistically, where I'm from, I've done the research, I should be dead or incarcerated. Only 7% of individuals from my zip code make it out of Chicago. So I use that platform to see how I can make a difference. And I've been so blessed and fortunate to connect with the 100, because the 100 offer these outlets that give me the opportunity to give back to my community. Giving back to my community is one of my core values. And some of the things, the work that we do is, once again, all mentoring youth driven. The model of the 100 is real men giving time to positively impact the development of our youth in our city, in our community. Our motto is what they see is what they'll be. And I'll say that again, what they see is what they'll be. Many times in our community, they don't see us. They do not see us in the professional realm. They do not see a lot of positivity because we have the barriers that prevent that. The work that the 100 do does not get publicized as much as it should. We have several programs that run throughout the academic year where it does not get televised. We have programs where we teach our young men how to be productive citizens in society. We teach our men the personal development, leadership skills, education, from a number of different perspectives. And with these programs, we're confident that we're doing our due diligence with the work in our community. And a lot of the men in our community do a lot of good work that doesn't go unnoticed, but that doesn't discourage us to continue to do the work and for our community. So I consider myself a man of action, right? I hear the media, I know what challenges we face in our community, but to several points, what are we going to do about it, right? I've made a vow to myself to give back until the day that I die. And it's uncomfortable, right? It hurts me to get out my bed 7 o'clock in the morning on a snowy winter morning to drive down to mentor, right? Of course I want to lay in the bed, but I owe myself to our community that we serve to get up and make a difference. And most of the time that's uncomfortable for our community. There's a lot of great people in our community. I take my hat off to our community, the sponsors, the organizations that support our community across the board. There's so much great work that's being done behind the scenes that doesn't go unnoticed. So I'm confident to know that we are making a marginal difference, but once again, we're not big as the media, right? Right, there's several things that took place recently, several deaths that took place recently that I've been fortunate to be in the presence of these individuals. The recent murder of Reid, I was in a building with him at a recent event with one of my mentees, Chris Beatty, who recently passed away. I was at an event with him and had a conversation with them a few months ago. So a lot of this stuff, the current events that continue to unfold does hit home and it does hurt. But let's just be honest. Racism is only one of the problems, but what really disturbs me is the black on black crime, right? And once again, I say that because that's what I'm most familiar with, and it's a bit of a challenge. One of my favorite quotes is from Gandhi, which states, be the change that you want to see in this world. And I've made a vow to myself to be that change that I would like to see in this world. So some of the programs through, like I said, you can reach out to me offline. But once again, this program, the 100 isn't just designated for Black men. We have people of color, right? We have the majority part of our program is a co-ed program. We have ladies, young ladies, that's a part of our curriculum as well. And I've been fortunate and blessed to have impacted hundreds of student lives over the many years I've been affiliated with the 100. I know I was trying to jump in the chat to add value where I see fit. And one of the chats that I read was one of the faculty members indicated that they see that a number of the African-American students perform less than a white counterpart in the area of mathematics. Yes, that is an issue, right? Once again, but we offer a curriculum to help that. Our summer academy teaches our youth within IPS school system, teaches our youth how to prepare for those challenging courses. So we have instructors throughout the summer, teachers that pretty much designate their summer to teach our Black and brown students how to deal with mathematics, how to deal with science. These are during their summer curriculum, right? And that's just an example. We recently implemented a robotics program because STEM is one of those areas that we really need to see people of color in. So we have a STEM program. We have a mentoring program which goes inside the IPS school districts, right, during their lunch breaks. So we're inside of these areas. And I mentioned to everyone before that I do work in the area of financial literacy, right? We know there's a disparity across the board. Home ownership is an issue across the board. There are so many check boxes that we could speak to in the Black community across the board. But the key is, where are we making that difference? Where are we strapping up our boots and being out in the community to make this change? So that's brings me to my point of UIndy. The only reason I heard of UIndy because of the work I started doing over 15 years ago. That was my exposure to UIndy, right? Well, Dr. Will and I, we pretty much mentor students in an area of financial security, personal investments, right? Black and brown students. Why is that important? Because we want to change that mindset. We want to change the perception that they could be more than just their position. We want our students to understand that they could create wealth outside of their 9-to-5, right? And these are the critical components of the 100 that, once again, really, it goes unnoticed in my eyes. But we don't stop there, right? How can we make that difference? So getting up out your comfort zone, as Terrence indicated earlier, and being a part of programs. And we're not the only program in town. There's a number of different programs.
Yeah, we're gonna have a list of those resources going out. I noticed that the chat, many of you all are putting resources in there. Please, in the Q&A, if the audience continues to put the resources, that's really good, because following this, we're gonna have resources that go out and more information associated with it. Torrey, I see you. Let me have Kory first share some of the resources that we have on campus.
Okay, and then just the leverage, because due to timing, I'll be respectful for your timing, Amber. But once again, that's a part of my DNA, is to work with our students of color. And then once again, not any student, right? I'm an advocate of all students. Let's just make that clear. But I know my position. I know when I walk on a campus of UIndy, I know my position very clearly. And working with our students of color is a passion of mine. I've been privileged to work with our students of color on campus through the Black Student Association here this past academic school year. And the things that we've worked on with their leadership team, as well as the community, is personal and professional development. I think that's one of the key components that I bring to the table, right? Many people may have not known that I was a part of this organization as their advisor, but that's the type of individual that I am. Because I love to see the outcome. I'm an outcome-driven individual. And what brings tears to my eyes is when I see the development of our youth on campus.
Yeah.
That's the drive. That's what keeps me coming back and getting up every morning to do the work that I do. So once again, I mean, for the sake of time, when we speak about action, everyone will pretty much determine what it is they could do. I'm not here mentioning to do the work that I do, because everyone serves a different space. But this is where the rubber meets the road for me. This is what allowed me to sleep good at night, realizing the impact that's actually made in the community. And once again, I'm here, of course, for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Andre. Kory, you want to give us a quick highlight of where we can go for resources? And then I will close. Yeah.
I know we're running out of time, so we'll make sure that we have the comprehensive list of resources that we can post for all the participants. But I think it's important that we spend time really listening to the needs of our faculty, staff, and students, particularly our students. I know a lot of us recently, especially the live-in residence hall staff, as well as those of us who have been around campus, have been spending a lot of time just providing emotional support to students. And I think it's so important that we're listening to the voices of our students and faculty, staff across campus who really are struggling during this time. And I think there'll be a variety of resources from our counseling center that's available, from our university chaplains that are available, to student affairs staff, and we'll have all those resources available. But I think it's just really important at this time that we're spending time listening to those voices and the needs. And then I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat, or what are we doing long term? What are we going to continue to do to address these issues? And I think for all of us on the panel, we're committed to continuing to talk about these things and figure out what actions we need to take to address them across campus. So I think this is not just a 90-minute conversation, as Amber had stated earlier, about what are we going to do as we move forward to really change the campus culture.
Exactly. And I do want to reiterate that, as you said, I'm gonna close with some of the things that we have to offer here coming up, and let you know that we're taking the information from the chat. Dr. Manuel has a few things he wants to say before we leave, but I want to let you know before we hang up, I'm going to share with you some opportunities that we have coming up for some more individualized experiences with some of the people you even see on here today. So understand that this is not the end, okay? So I'll turn it over to Rob for him to share some things, and then I'll pull up our screen.
Thanks, Amber. Reading through the comments and the Q&A, I'm struck by the desire to move, the desire to engage and have movement beyond today. And can't figure out how to respond directly necessarily to these, but I'm taking the names and are emailing people directly some thoughts. I just want to end by saying, for me, as the president, when you look, I don't remember who said it, but they said, when the lights go out, the first thing you do is acknowledge that the lights went out. and then you can figure out your path forward. And so what you have from me is a commitment that we've got areas where the lights have gone out, where we need to figure out what our reaction and our changes should be. And the fervor of addressing them will come very similar to the fervor we had for addressing them with the coronavirus that came through, looking at every analysis and every process and every policy and seeing what we can do. I've gotten a couple messages since the start of this about things that we can kind of address immediately around attracting and recruiting and having environments for students, for Black students, making sure the outcomes are there, trying to find out what the issues are for African-American females who leave the university, maybe at greater rates than other populations. And so I think we need to begin to focus and identify these things. Amber came on board at a time when we had done a lot of work to justify an equity and inclusion position on campus. Now she's able to take that motion and move it into action. And I've got a lot of faith in Amber's ability to help lead these conversations going forward, including kind of judging what our readiness is, what our cultural competencies are, what our readiness is to move beyond these, and help me and our cabinet and our other leaders around the campus design that path forward for action. And I just want to end with my commitment to making sure that these conversations and these actions and these approaches will be at the forefront of our mind as we move through our planning over the summer for the next year and for the next 5 years.
Thank you for sharing that. I was trying to get myself. Thank you for sharing that. I want to just close with letting you all know some conversations that we have coming up here next week. Also, what's not on here is we are having some conversations. Dr. Wilson and Kuykendall and Andre will be meeting with the African-American males tomorrow in a conversation. I will be meeting with African-American females. These are students Black students that will be having private conversations with us on tomorrow to show support there. And so they've already been invited and RSVPing for that. And then we also have next week these events coming up. You will receive this information in your email tomorrow. So I just want to let you know that today on the call with us was Francine Carter and Erica Swallow. They will be doing a workshop on white allyship. We have people already working on Women of Color in the Academy, a program that we're starting, and that we'll be meeting next week as well as Faith and Justice with UND's ecumenical programs. So I just wanted to make you aware that once again, we are continuing this work. This is not where we stop. We are creating a strategy, an inclusion strategy for our institution. We are already in this process. And so this is not just something we're talking about. This is something we're doing with accountability and measures in place. And as Rob just pointed out, our cabinet, our provost council, our executive leadership are on board to see the changes that we want to see made, that we have to see made. So we are dedicated to this work. And everybody on this call, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you for doing the work that you're doing and for being the voice that you are right now. So thank you to everyone. Please, once again, put your commentary in the chat so we will know how to structure some of our workshops in the future and conversations in the future. And once again, this is the start, not the end. And we'll see you again on #BelongSpace. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.